Maria. The older woman's voice cracked as she reached for my face with trembling hands. Her eyes were wet, desperate, alive in a way the chart said was impossible. Maria, you came back. After all these years, you came back. I wasn't Maria. Maria had been dead for 53 years, but standing in that memory care facility, with Silvana Moretti clutching my hands like I was her salvation, I made a choice that would change everything. I'm here, I whispered. I'm right here. Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Enzo Moretti, the man who controlled half of New York's underworld, the son his mother hadn't recognized in 2 years, stood frozen in the doorway. His face was a mask of shock, hope, and something that looked dangerously like hunger. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since I walked into this family's catastrophe and became the bridge between a dying woman and the dangerous son she could no longer remember. 3 weeks since I stopped being invisible and started being essential. And now someone wants me dead for it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you how a failed scientist became the only person a mafia boss would kill for. Let me tell you about the day I met Enzo Moretti. The sound reached me before. I saw him, a ragged exhale that carried the weight of someone breaking. I looked up from the intake paperwork at the nurse's station. I saw him. A man too large for the delicate waiting room of the Silvana Moretti Memory Care Wing, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the violence in his shoulders, the grief in the curve of his spine. He was burying his face in his hands. And something about the gesture, so human, so raw, made me forget every warning my survival instincts were screaming. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. 3 weeks ago, I was Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead researcher at the Boston Institute for Neurodegenerative Disorders. I had spent 6 years developing a theory about emotional memory, persistence in Alzheimer's, patience, the radical idea that certain emotional connections could survive when everything else was gone. My colleagues called it interesting. My funding committee called it speculative. My department head called it career suicide. When my lab closed and my research died, I did what desperate people do. I went back to the beginning. Before the PhD, before the accolades that meant nothing, I had been a caregiver. I had put myself through college, changing bedpans and holding the hands of the forgotten. The work was brutal, underpaid, and honest. The Moretti facility was none of those things. It was private, exclusive, and paid 3 times the market rate. In this part of New York, where the brownstones had bulletproof windows and the cars had armed drivers, you learned not to ask where the money came from. Gloria, the charge nurse, caught my eye and shook her head slightly, a warning. Don't engage. Don't make yourself visible. But visibility had never been my problem. Invisibility was my armor. At 34, I was expertly forgettable. Plain features, dark hair and a practical bun, glasses I didn't technically need but wore because they made patients trust me. I had cultivated ordinariness like a survival skill. I should have listened to Gloria. Instead, I poured a cup of coffee from the staff pot and sat down next to Enzo Moretti. He looked up. His eyes were the color of espresso, red-rimmed but dry, sharp enough to cut despite the grief. He was brutal in his beauty, all hard angles and a jaw carved from marble. A thin white scar bisected his left eyebrow. Violence, not an accident. He assessed me with predator stillness, and I felt catalogued, categorized, judged. You're new. His voice was low, roughened, Mediterranean accented. Started this morning. I held out the coffee. You looked like you needed this more than I do. He didn't take it immediately. His eyes moved over my face, my scrubs, and the ID badge clipped to my pocket. Dr. E. Vasquez, specialized care. He lingered on the doctor part. You're a doctor? Was, now I'm a caregiver. Life has a twisted sense of humor. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He took the coffee. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt the calluses, the carefully controlled strength. This was not a man who had ever sat behind a desk. My mother. He stopped, the words catching on something jagged. He tried again. She doesn't know me anymore. Today she looked at me and screamed, called me an intruder, begged them to make me leave. I had seen this before, the cruelest stage, when loved ones become sources of terror. There was no comfort I could offer that wouldn't be a lie, so I told him the truth. The disease takes episodic memory first. Your name, your history, your face. But emotional memory, the felt sense of connection, can persist longer. She may not know you're her son, but somewhere deep, she might still feel that you matter. He stared at me, and I realized I'd said too much. This wasn't my role. I was here to change sheets and document decline, not lecture the grieving family about neuroscience. But instead of dismissing me, Enzo Moretti leaned forward. You studied this, not a question. Before I studied the inside of unemployment offices, yes. The corner of his mouth twitched. It briefly transformed his face, showing me someone younger beneath the hardness. What would it take to have you assigned specifically to my mother's care? The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. I heard command in it, the expectation that reality would bend to his will, but underneath was something raw, desperate. That's not really how it works. The director answers to me. He said it quietly, with absolute certainty. As does everyone in this building. I funded it. I named it for her. I would buy her the world if the world could bring her back. He looked toward the window, toward the city beyond. But it can't, so I buy her comfort. And now I'm asking you, Dr. Vasquez, will you be part of that comfort? Every instinct screamed danger. Proximity to this man would destroy my carefully invisible life. But I thought of my abandoned research, my shelved theories. I thought of the possibility that I might learn something, here that could change everything. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I thought of how it felt to be looked at by Enzo Moretti and truly seen, as if I were something more than furniture. Tell me about your mother, I said. He studied me with that predator's assessment. Then he made a decision. I saw it happen. The slight relaxation, the almost imperceptible nod. Her name is Silvana. She's 73. Born in a village outside Naples. Came to this country with nothing but faith and stubbornness. Raised me alone after my father died. Worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table. His voice caught. She never let me see her cry. Not once, no matter how bad things got. She's the strongest person I've ever known. And now she doesn't know my name. The grief in his voice had its own gravity. I felt myself pulled toward it despite every warning. I'll need full access to her medical history, I heard myself say. And time. Not just for routine care, for observation, interaction. I want to understand how she processes emotional stimuli. You'll have whatever you need. He stood, and I realized how tall he was. Well over 6 feet. Built like a man who learned to fight before he learned to read. He extended his hand. We have an agreement, Dr. Vasquez. I took it. His grip was firm, careful, controlled. Elena. If we're working closely, you should call me Elena. Elena. He tested the name, and something warm moved through me that I firmly ignored. I'll be here every day, watching. My mother is all I have left. He released my hand and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused without turning. Thank you. For the coffee, and for not lying to me about hope. Then he was gone. And I sat holding the cold cup I'd meant for him, wondering what exactly I had just agreed to. Silvana Moretti's room looked like a shrine to a life in decline. Photographs covered every surface. Silvana as a fierce-eyed young woman on a ship's deck, New York Harbor behind her, in a simple wedding dress, radiant, holding an infant with transformative tenderness, and with Enzo at every age, always wearing the same expression of protective love. The woman in the bed bore little resemblance to those images. Silvana was thin now, fragile in a way that seemed impossible for someone who had once radiated such strength. White hair, papery skin, hands that moved restlessly on the blanket, fingers plucking at invisible threads. I approached slowly, making sure my footsteps were audible. Mrs. Moretti, my name is Elena. I'm going to be helping take care of you. Her eyes opened, dark brown, almost black. For a moment, nothing, just vacancy. Then something shifted. Her gaze focused on my face with an intensity that made me go completely still. Maria. She whispered it like a prayer. The name hit me physically. I'd read her file. Maria had been Silvana's sister, dead for over 40 years. Killed in a car accident in Naples before Silvana emigrated. There were no photographs of Maria anywhere in the facility. I had checked. No, Mrs. Moretti, I'm Elena. I'm one of your caregivers. But Silvana wasn't listening. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers finding my face, tracing my features with desperate tenderness. Maria, you came. I knew you would. I waited so long. Her Italian was rapid, musical, thick with southern accent and old grief. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. Her hands cupped my face like I was something precious, miraculous. The protocol said to redirect and avoid reinforcing delusions gently. But the look in her eyes, the raw, overwhelming joy, stopped the clinical words in my throat. This woman had spent 8 years in confusion and fear, and now, for the first time in months, according to her chart, she was present, connected, happy. "I'm here," I heard myself say. "I'm right here." Silvana pulled me closer. I sat on the edge of her bed as she clutched my hands and wept with relief. She spoke in rapid Italian, a flood of memory and emotion that had been dammed up for decades. Their childhood, picking olives in their grandmother's grove, their mother's cooking, the way the whole village smelled like tomatoes and basil in summer, a boy named Paolo, who had courted them both. I understood perhaps half of it, my functional Italian struggling to keep up. But I didn't need every word. I understood the emotion, the relief, the homecoming. She talked for nearly an hour. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light dimmed. Her grip loosened. Her gaze went vague. "Who are you?" Polite confusion. "Are you one of the new nurses?" "Yes, Mrs. Moretti. My name is Elena." "That's nice," she said, already drifting. "Very nice." She was asleep within minutes. Her face peaceful in a way the chart said it rarely was. I sat watching her breathe, my mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Recognition of deceased relatives was common, but usually accompanied by distress. Not joy, the sustained engagement, the coherent narrative, the emotional accessibility. These were extraordinary. My abandoned research. My theory about emotional memory persistence. What I'd just witnessed was exactly the evidence. I'd spent years trying to find an unidentified trigger unlocked. What the disease was supposed to have destroyed. I was so absorbed I didn't hear the door open. "She's sleeping." Enzo's voice made me jump. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. But his eyes moved from his mother's peaceful expression to my hands, still held loosely in hers. "She recognized you," he said quietly. "No, she thought I was someone else. Someone named Maria." The effect was immediate. Enzo went pale, his composure cracking before he rebuilt it. "Maria was her sister. Died before I was born. My mother never spoke of her, not once in my entire life. I only learned the name from old documents after she got sick. She spoke about her today, for almost an hour. Childhood memories. Stories I don't think she's told anyone in decades. She was present, Mr. Moretti, truly present, then gone again." He moved into the room slowly, eyes fixed on his mother's sleeping face. He sat in the chair opposite me, struggling with something, hope warring with the fear of hoping. "She doesn't do this with anyone else. Not the nurses, not me. She hasn't had a lucid period in months. I know, I read her chart." "Then how do you explain it?" I couldn't, not yet, but the scientist in me, the one I thought I'd buried under scrubs and resignation, was waking up. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." He looked at me then, really looked, the way he had in the waiting room. Like he was seeing past the surface to something underneath. It was uncomfortable, thrilling, hazardous. My mother hasn't responded to anyone as she responded to you. Not since before she forgot my name. His voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "What are you, Elena Vasquez?" "A caregiver with a research background and too many questions." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, black with silver lettering. He placed it on the bedside table. "My personal number. If anything changes with her day or night, I want to know. If you discover why she responds to you, I want to know that too." I picked up the card. Heavy, expensive stock. Only his name and a phone number. No title, no company, no indication of who or what Enzo Moretti actually was, though I was beginning to form suspicions I didn't want to examine. "I'll keep you informed. See that you do." He stood looking down at his mother. The expression on his face was raw, unguarded, a son's love stripped bare by loss. "She's all I have. She's all I've ever had." Then he left, and I was alone with Silvana, her breathing slow and steady, my mind spinning. I looked at the card in my hand. I should throw it away, request reassignment, run as far as my practical and visible life could take me. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket, sat back beside my sleeping patient, and began to plan. The next 3 weeks revealed a pattern that defied everything in the medical literature. Every morning at 6, I entered Silvana's room before the chaos began. Every morning, she looked at me with those dark eyes and called me Maria. And every morning, for a window that varied from 20 minutes to 2 hours, she was present in a way her chart said was medically impossible. I documented everything with scientific obsession. Time of day mattered. Morning sessions produced longer lucid periods. Physical touch accelerated recognition. If I held her hand within the first minute, she found Maria faster and stayed longer. Music helped. An old Italian radio station playing songs from the 50s and 60s would clear her eyes, and her cracked voice would sing along. But always Maria. Never Elena. And I needed to understand why. I pulled every photograph of Maria from the facility's sparse archives. Faded images showed a young woman, dark-haired, serious-faced. She looked nothing like me. Different coloring, different features, different build, no physical resemblance to explain the consistent misidentification. So what was it? I tested variables with research day rigor, changed perfume, then stopped wearing any. No effect. Styled my hair differently, up, down, covered, no effect. Wore different colors, spoke in various tones, approached from multiple angles. Nothing changed the fundamental equation. Silvana saw me. Silvana saw Maria. The answer came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks and 4 days in. She was lucid, telling me about the lemon trees in their family courtyard and how Maria used to climb them despite their mother's scolding. Then she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. "You have her heart," she said in Italian. "The same heart. I can feel it." "What do you mean?" Maria was brave, strong. She never let anyone suffer alone. When other children were cruel, she fought them. When I was sick, she slept on the floor beside my bed. When I was afraid, she held my hand and told stories until the fear went away. Silvana's eyes were bright with tears. "You do these things. You stay when others leave. You touch when others are afraid. You have her heart." I sat very still, something cold and electric moving through me. Not appearance, not voice or gesture, emotional signature. The way I moved through the world, the way I related to her, the quality of presence I brought. Silvana's damaged brain couldn't recognize faces, names, or recent memories. But it could still read something deeper, something the disease hadn't touched. She was recognizing a pattern of care, a way of being that reminded her so strongly of her sister that her brain had made the connection and refused to let go. My theory was correct. Emotional memory persisted, and I was living proof. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Enzo's voice. He was standing in the doorway, as he increasingly was during my morning sessions. His visits had become more frequent, first evenings, then afternoons, now mornings, observing with dark, unreadable eyes. "I think I understand," I said, breathless with discovery. "I think I know why she recognizes me." His expression sharpened. He stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click that felt significant. "Tell me." So I did. I explained my theory, my research, and my observations. Emotional memory, pattern recognition, how trauma and love could imprint at levels that conscious memory couldn't touch. I talked too much, words spilling with unusual enthusiasm, but Enzo listened without interrupting, eyes never leaving my face. When I finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're saying my mother recognizes you because of who you are, not what you look like, because of how you make her feel." Essentially, yes. The disease destroyed her cognitive pathways for identification, but emotional pathways remain intact. She can't remember I'm her caregiver, but she can feel that I care, and that feeling is so reminiscent of her sister that her brain bridged the gap. Maria died when my mother was 19, over 50 years ago, and you're saying that connection is still there, still accessible after everything the disease has taken? That's exactly what I'm saying. He turned away, moving to the window, silhouette dark against morning light. I watched tension in his shoulders, hands curling into fists. "When I visit her," he said quietly, "she screams. She calls for help. She looks at me like I'm a monster." He paused, years of weight in his silence. "I'm her son. I've loved her my whole life. Why can't she feel that?" The question was raw, wounded. This wasn't just about his mother. This was about him, about everything he was and everything he'd become. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'd like to find out. If you'll let me." He turned back. In the morning light, his features were softer, hard edges blurred by shadow and emotion. Younger, almost vulnerable. "What would you need?" "Time, access, resources to document this, systematically," and I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I need to understand who she was before the disease, who you were to her. There might be something in your relationship, some emotional signature triggering fear instead of recognition." His jaw tightened. "You want to psychoanalyze my relationship with my mother? I want to understand Why she can feel her dead sister in a stranger but can't feel her living son. And I want to see if there's a way to change that. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken things. I watched him wrestle with the decision, pride warring with desperation. Finally, tonight, after visiting hours, I'll send a car. A car? You want to understand who my mother was? Who I was to her? The answers aren't in this room. They're in the home she built, the life she lived, the memories she left behind. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I'm trusting you, Elena, with things I don't trust anyone with. Don't make me regret it. Then he was gone, and I was left with Silvana, who had fallen asleep during our conversation, face peaceful, lips curved in a faint smile. I looked at the sleeping woman, then at the door her son had just walked through. I thought about the car that would come tonight, the home I would enter, the secrets I would learn. I was crossing a line, the boundary between professional and personal, blurring with every step deeper into this family's world. The smart thing would be to refuse. Keep a distance. Remember, I was here for a paycheck and perhaps informal research, not to become entangled in the complicated life of a man who carried violence in his hands and grief in his eyes. But Silvana had called me brave, said I had her sister's heart. Maybe it was time to prove her right. I squeezed her sleeping hand and began preparing myself for whatever the night would bring. The car was black, sleek, and driven by a man who spoke not a single word during the 40-minute journey. I watched Manhattan's skyline recede, replaced by increasingly affluent suburbs, then by something else entirely. Gates, walls, properties that disappeared into private darkness. We turned onto an unmarked road and wound through nearly a mile of forest. Then the trees opened and I saw the house. Not a house, an estate. An Italian villa that looked as if it had been transported stone by stone from Tuscany. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows. Fountains played in the circular drive. Gardens stretched into darkness, fragrant with night-blooming jasmine. This was where Silvana Moretti had built her American life. This was the kingdom she'd created for her son. And this was where I was about to learn secrets most people didn't survive knowing. Enzo waited at the front door. He'd changed into dark trousers and a charcoal sweater, making him look less like a businessman and more like what he actually was: dangerous, powerful, and tonight, strangely open. You came, he said. You sent a car. Seemed rude to refuse. The ghost of a smile. Come inside. We have a lot to discuss. The interior was even more impressive. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, museum catalog art. But what struck me were the personal touches. Photographs everywhere, like in Silvana's room. Handmade Afghans draped over priceless furniture. Religious icons and family heirlooms mixed with apparent wealth. Not a showpiece, a home, built with love and maintained with devotion. Enzo led me to a library at the back of the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, volumes in Italian and English. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. 2 leather chairs faced each other before the flames, and on the table between them sat wine and 2 glasses. Please, he gestured to a chair. Sit. This will take time. I sat. He poured wine without asking, handed me a glass, and settled across from me. Firelight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the scar in his strong jaw, a painting of a warrior at rest, beautiful and brutal. You want to understand my mother. To do that, you need to understand where she came from, where we came from. He took a drink, staring into flames. What do you know about me, Elena? What have you heard? I considered lying, but something about the night, the intimacy, the weight of what we were doing demanded honesty. I know your money doesn't come from a legitimate business. I know people are afraid of you, and not because you're unpleasant at parties. I know the facility was funded with cash. No one questioned because asking would be dangerous. I met his eyes. I know what you are, Enzo. I've known since day one. He didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed relieved. A man setting down a burden carried too long. And yet you're here. I'm here for your mother. Whatever you are, she's just a woman with a disease. She deserves care. She deserves to be understood. She deserves better than a son like me. That's what you're thinking. I wasn't thinking that at all. He looked at me sharply, searching for the lie. When he didn't find it, something in his expression shifted. My mother came to this country with nothing. No money, no English, no family. Her sister is dead. Her parents are dead, 19 years old and completely alone. She cleaned houses for wealthy families in Brooklyn, 16-hour days. She saved every penny. When she had had enough, she started a business, cleaning services for companies instead of homes. It was legitimate, all of it. She never broke a law. He paused, swirling wine. She met my father when she was 25. Vittorio Moretti, handsome, charming, from a good family in Naples. What she didn't know was what his family actually did. By the time she found out, she was pregnant with me, and Vittorio was dead. The word hung in the air. How? I asked softly. Killed by a rival family when I was 6 months old, shot in the street in broad daylight. My mother saw it happen. She was holding me in her arms. I set down my wine, the fire's warmth suddenly insufficient. She could have run. They took the insurance money and disappeared, started over where the Moretti name meant nothing. But she didn't. She stayed. She raised me in the shadow of what my father was, and she tried. God, how she tried, to keep me from becoming the same thing. But you did. Worse. My father was a soldier. I became a general. By 30, I controlled everything he'd only dreamed of. And my mother watched it happen. Watched her son become the thing she feared most. He stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace, back to me. Flames threw his shadow long across the floor. She never said a word against me. Never told me she was disappointed, though I know she was. She went to church every Sunday and lit candles for my soul. She cooked my favorite meals when I came home covered, in sins she couldn't see but always sensed. She loved me unconditionally, even though I became everything she tried to save me from. His voice cracked slightly, and he paused to collect himself. When the diagnosis came, I told myself it was punishment. God was taking her from me piece by piece, making me watch her forget the son who'd failed her. Maybe that's true. Maybe I deserve exactly this. Enzo, the day she forgot my name was the worst day of my life. Worse than my father's death. Worse than anything I've done or had done to me. She looked at me with no recognition, and I realized I'd lost her. Not to death, not yet, but to something crueler. Still alive, still here, but the mother who knew me was gone. He turned to face me, and I saw the raw grief he usually kept hidden. Eyes bright with unshed tears. That's why she fears you, I said slowly, pieces falling into place. The emotional signature you carry. She can't identify you cognitively, but somewhere in her damaged brain, she recognizes the feeling you bring, and what she feels is guilt, grief, the weight of watching. Her son becomes something she never wanted. When she sees you now, she doesn't see Enzo. She feels a lifetime of complicated love and unspoken disappointment, and to a brain that can't process that complexity, it reads as a threat. Enzo stared at me. Then he sat heavily, like a man whose strings had been cut. You think she's afraid of me because she loved me too much. Because that love is too heavy for her to carry now. Emotional memory works in both directions. Your presence carries joy, yes, but also pain. Losing her husband. Watching you choose a path she couldn't stop. The accumulation of loving someone she couldn't save. I leaned forward. It's not that she doesn't love you. It's that loving you hurts too much for her broken mind to bear. The silence was profound. Fire crackled. Somewhere a clock chimed 10. Is there a way to fix it? His voice was rough. A way to change what she feels when she sees me? I don't know yet, but I want to try. He looked at me with an intensity that stopped my breath. Why? Why do you care what happens to a woman you've known 3 weeks? To a family with blood on its hands? Fair question. I considered carefully. Because your mother is more than her disease. Because she deserves peace, not fear. Because the science could help thousands of other families. I paused. And because you love her in a way that breaks my heart. And I want to see if there's a way to let her feel that love again. He didn't respond with words. He reached across the space and took my hand. Warm, strong, impossibly gentle. Stay, not just at the facility. Here, in this house, close to her things, her memories. I'll give you everything you need. Full access. Complete resources. Just help me find a way back to my mother before it's too late. I looked at our joined hands. At this man who was everything. I should avoid, and yet somehow exactly what I couldn't turn away from. All right, I said. I'll stay. I moved into the estate 3 days later. Enzo prepared a suite in the east wing. Beautiful rooms with warm wood, soft fabrics, windows overlooking gardens that seemed endless. It felt like a gilded cage, but I'd walked in willingly, and the lock was one I could open any time. At least that's what I told myself. The first week was pure research. Decades of photographs, letters, documents. I pieced together Silvana's life with archaeological meticulousness. Her childhood in Naples, poverty that shaped her, The sister she'd adored and lost young, her arrival in America, back-breaking work, and slow accumulation of success. And Vittorio, Enzo's father, was a ghost haunting every corner, present in photographs, letters, and architectural choices. Handsome, charming, beloved, despite everything he was. Letters between them were passionate, desperate, full of love that burned too bright to last. He died violently, publicly, leaving Silvana alone with an infant and a legacy of blood. The more I learned, the more I understood. Enzo was all she had left of Vittorio, the only piece of her husband remaining in the world. She'd loved him with the fierce, consuming devotion of someone who'd already lost too much. When he chose his father's path despite her prayers, it must have broken something inside her that never healed. I spent days in the library, surrounded by artifacts of a well-lived, painfully lost life. Evenings at the facility, sitting with Silvana, testing theories, documenting every lucid moment, and nights lying awake in my beautiful room, thinking about Enzo Moretti and the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He was there constantly. At the house, appearing in the library doorway with coffee or food, checking progress with casual interest that didn't hide desperation. At the facility, sitting in his mother's room corner, watching our interactions with eyes burning with equal parts hope and fear. We didn't talk about anything personal, kept conversations focused on Silvana, research, and clinical observations. But awareness between us grew stronger daily, a current running underneath careful professionalism. It was during the third week that everything changed. I developed a new protocol, a way of bridging. The gap between the emotional signature Silvana responded to in me and the complicated signature Enzo carried. Simple theory: if Silvana's brain used emotional pattern recognition instead of facial recognition, perhaps I could serve as translator. Buffer. Someone whose presence could dilute the intensity of Enzo's emotional weight and let Silvana access the love underneath the pain. We tried it on a Tuesday morning, when lucidity typically peaked. I entered first, as usual, and waited for her to find Maria. Once she was calm and present, I signaled to Enzo, who was waiting just outside. He entered slowly, movements careful, face deliberately neutral. I watched Silvana's expression, ready to intervene at the first sign of distress. Her eyes moved from me to her son. Familiar confusion began clouding her features. "It's all right," I said softly, taking her hand. "This is a friend of mine. He's here to visit." Silvana looked at Enzo again, brow furrowed. I felt the tremor in her fingers, the beginning of the fear response that usually ended with screaming and sedation. But I held her hand firmly, kept my voice calm and warm, let the emotional signature she trusted flow through our physical connection. "A friend," she repeated uncertainly. "Yes, a good man. Someone who cares about you very much." Enzo stood frozen, barely breathing. I saw hope in his eyes, desperate, painful hope of a son who just wanted his mother to look at him without fear. Silvana studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, tension eased from her face. "He has sad eyes," she said to me in Italian. "Like someone who's lost too much." "He has," I agreed. "But he's still here, still fighting." She nodded, accepting this. Then she looked Enzo directly in the eye and said something that stopped my heart. "You remind me of someone, a boy I used to know. He had the same sadness." Enzo's composure cracked. I saw his hands tremble, moisture gathering in his eyes. "What was his name?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Silvana frowned, searching through memory's ruins. "I don't remember, but I loved him. I loved him very much." The sound that escaped Enzo was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He moved forward slowly, kneeling beside her bed, bringing himself to her level. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, just looked at him with gentle curiosity and the faintest shadow of recognition. "Can I hold your hand?" She considered, then nodded. When his fingers closed around hers, she smiled. "Your hands are cold. You should wear gloves." "I will, Mama," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop it. But Silvana didn't react to the name. She just patted his hand with her free one and looked at me. "Maria, your friend is sad. We should make him some tea." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, my voice thick. "Why don't you tell him about the lemon trees while I arrange it?" I slipped out, giving them privacy, heart pounding with the magnitude of what had just happened. Through the door window, I watched Silvana talk to her son, animated and present, hands moving as she described something only she could see. Enzo listened with his whole body leaning toward her, drinking in every word like a man dying of thirst. It wasn't full recognition. She still didn't know he was her son, but she wasn't afraid. For the first time in months, she was in the same room with him without terror or confusion, comfortable, happy. A breakthrough, small, fragile, but real. I leaned against the wall and let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. My hands shook. My eyes were wet. This was why I'd become a scientist, not for publications or grants, but for moments like this, when understanding led to connection, when knowledge became healing. When Enzo finally emerged, his face was transformed. Hard edges softened. Constant tension eased. He looked younger, lighter, like someone who'd just set down a weight carried for years. "She talked to me," he said, voice full of wonder. "She held my hand and talked to me." "I know, I saw." He looked at me then, really looked, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "You did this. Whatever science or magic or miracle you worked, you gave me something I thought was gone forever. It's not a miracle. It's just understanding how the brain processes emotional connection. We can build on this, repeat it, maybe even expand it." He shook his head. "Call it what you want. To me, it's a miracle. And you made it happen." He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his body's heat, smell his subtle cologne. His hand came up to cup my face, gentle despite the calluses, tender despite the violence those hands had surely committed. "Elena," he said, and my name in his voice was a prayer. "Enzo, we shouldn't—" I know we shouldn't. You work for me. You're here for my mother. This is complicated in ways that could destroy everything." His thumb traced my cheekbone, featherlight. "But I've spent my whole life taking what I wanted without apology. I'm asking now, asking if you feel what I feel, asking if there's something here worth the complication." I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed this was a mistake, that entanglement with this man would only end in disaster. But his hand was warm on my face. His eyes were full of something that looked terrifyingly like love, and I'd never in my life been looked at the way Enzo Moretti looked at me. "I feel it," I admitted. "I've felt it since the first day." He closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over his features. When he opened them, they were darker, more intense. "Then we figure it out together. Whatever comes, whatever complications, we face them. Agreed?" I should have said no. "Agreed," I whispered. And when he kissed me there in the hallway of his mother's care facility, it felt less like a beginning and more like an inevitability. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance, breakthrough and heartbreak, professional progress and personal entanglement that deepened daily. My research with Silvana continued, yielding results that would make my former colleagues weep with envy. The bridging technique worked consistently enough that we established a routine. Every morning I'd enter first. She'd find Maria. We'd talk. Then Enzo would join, introduced constantly as my friend, and Silvana would accept him with gentle tolerance. No recognition, not the reunion Enzo craved, but contact, connection, infinitely better than the screaming and terror that had defined their relationship for 2 years. I documented everything with scientific rigor. Protocols, observations, incremental improvements, building a case study that could revolutionize emotional memory approaches in Alzheimer's patients. For the first time since my funding evaporated, I felt like a real researcher, like my work mattered. But work wasn't the only thing consuming my thoughts. Enzo and I were careful, had to be. Facility staff couldn't know about our relationship. And his associates, the shadowy network, I tried not to think about, definitely couldn't say. So we existed in stolen moments and secret spaces, late nights in the library when the house was dark, early mornings in the gardens, walking among roses as the sun crept over the horizon, whispered conversations, careful touches, hunger that grew more intense the more we tried to contain it. He told me things in those quiet hours. I suspected he'd never told anyone. About the first time, he'd taken a life at 17, defending his mother from men collecting his father's unpaid debt. Years of violence that followed, a slow accumulation of power transforming him from a scared boy into the man everyone feared. The loneliness of leadership, the way everyone wanted something, expected something, and no one ever just wanted him. I listened without judgment. I'd made peace with who he was the moment I agreed to move into his house. I couldn't change his past, undo the blood on his hands, but I could see the man underneath the monster, the boy who'd loved his mother so fiercely he'd become something terrible to protect her. And I couldn't find it in myself to condemn him. In return, I told him about my past, childhood in foster care, shuffled between homes, never quite belonging. The grandmother who took me in at 15, the only person who'd made me feel wanted, died of Alzheimer's when I was in grad school. Years of research that followed, driven by a desperate need to understand the disease that stole the only family I'd known. We were both orphans in our way, both shaped by loss into something more complex and sharper than we might otherwise have been. Maybe that's why we recognized each other. Perhaps that's why the connection between us felt less like falling in love and more like coming home. It was during the 6th week that the outside world finally intruded on our fragile paradise. I was in the library reviewing notes from that morning session when Enzo appeared. One look at his face told me something was wrong. The softness I'd grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by the hard, cold mask of who he was to everyone else. "We need to talk," he said. I set aside my notes. What happened? He closed the door, moved to the window, back to me, shoulders rigid. "There's a situation, business, something I've been handling for months has finally come to a head." He paused, took a breath. "I have to leave. Tonight. I don't know how long." The words hit harder than expected. In 6 weeks, we'd never been apart for more than a few hours. The thought of him gone, not knowing where he was or when he'd return, felt like a physical ache. "Where are you going?" "I can't tell you." "The less you know, the safer you are." I stood moving toward him. "Enzo, what's going on?" He turned to face me, and I saw conflict in his eyes. The part that wants to protect me by keeping me ignorant is warring with the part that has grown, used to sharing everything. There are people who want what I have. Territory, business, power. They've been making moves for months, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses, and now they've found one. Cold dread settled in my stomach. What weakness? Silence. Then very quietly, "You." The word hung in the air. "Me?" Word got out that I've taken an interest in someone. That a woman is living in my house, spending time at my mother's facility, who matters to me in a way no one has in a very long time. His jaw tightened. In my world, that makes you a target, and it makes me vulnerable. I should have been afraid. Any rational person would be. But what I felt was anger. Anger at a world that could take something as simple as love and turn it into a weapon. Anger at invisible enemies threatening to destroy the fragile peace we'd built. "So what do we do?" "I handle it. Eliminate the threat before it touches you or my mother. But that means leaving, going to ground, dealing with this personally." He crossed to me, took my hands. "I need you to promise something." "What?" "Stay here. Don't go to the facility alone. Luca will assign guards, men I trust with my life. Don't leave the estate. Contact anyone outside. Do anything that could draw attention." His grip tightened. "I can't focus if I'm worried about you. I need to know you're safe." The cage I'd walked into willingly suddenly felt smaller, but I saw fear underneath his commands, very real terror of losing something precious. "I promise," I said. "But you have to promise me too." "Anything. Come back. Whatever you have to do, whatever it costs, come back to me." He pulled me into his arms, holding me with desperation that said more than words. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his scent, trying to memorize the feeling of his body against mine. "I will," he murmured into my hair. "I will always come back to you." He left that night, disappearing into a black car that swallowed him up and carried him to a world I could never fully enter. I watched from the window until taillights vanished into darkness, then stood there long afterward staring at nothing, feeling the weight of his absence. The house felt enormous without him. Empty. Every shadow seemed threatening, every silence pregnant with danger. I retreated to my room and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I kept thinking about faceless enemies who saw me as a weakness, about Enzo somewhere in the night dealing with threats I couldn't imagine, about Silvana alone in her facility without either of us. Silvana. The thought struck with sudden force. Enzo said not to go alone, but Silvana needed consistency. Our morning sessions were the only thing keeping her stable, keeping her lucid. If I disappeared for days or weeks, all our progress could unravel. I couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let his enemies take that from us, too. I made a decision. Maybe foolish. Maybe exactly the risk Enzo begged me not to take. But I'd spent my whole life being careful, invisible, safe. And where had that gotten me? Alone in a foster system that didn't want me. Alone in a career that abandoned me. Alone in a world that never had a place for someone like me. Enzo had given me something I'd never had. A home, a purpose, a love worth fighting for. I wasn't going to hide in a gilded cage while everything we built crumbled. I'd go to Silvana in the morning. Keep our routine, maintain her stability, protect the fragile bridge to her lost memories. And I'd trust that Enzo would do whatever he needed to keep us all safe. We were partners now. In love, in danger, in whatever came next. I just had to survive long enough for him to come back. Morning came gray and cold. Autumn leaching color from the world. I dressed carefully, practical clothes, and met Luca in the foyer. He was a mountain of a man, silent and watchful, with eyes that missed nothing, and loyalty to Enzo that bordered on religious. The boss said you'd want to go to the facility, Luca said. Not a question. Silvana needs me. The routine matters. He studied me, something that might have been respect flickering in granite features. Then he nodded. We go together. You don't leave my sight. Understood? Understood. The drive felt longer than usual. Familiar streets transformed into potential ambush points by newly awakened paranoia. But we arrived without incident, and I walked into Silvana's room with Luca positioned outside like a carved sentinel. She was awake, sitting up, dark eyes fixed on the window with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not confusion, not fear. Something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation. Maria, she said when she saw me, but her voice was different, stronger, clearer. I've been waiting for you. I sat beside her, taking her hand as always. But instead of launching into her usual stream of memories, Silvana was silent. She studied my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. You're in danger, she said suddenly. The words hit like ice water. Silvana rarely acknowledged the present. Her world was the past, a landscape of scrambled memory fragments. For her to speak about now, about me, about danger, unprecedented. What do you mean, Silvana? She gripped my hand with surprising strength. The boy with sad eyes. He loves you, but love makes people do foolish things. Makes them visible when they should stay hidden. My heart pounded. Silvana, do you know who I am? Where are you? She smiled, and for just a moment I saw her as she must have been before disease, before decades of loss, before time eroded everything. Sharp, knowing, formidable. I know enough. I know my son has finally found someone worth protecting, and I know some people will use that against him. My son. She'd said my son. Silvana, I breathed. You remember him? You remember Enzo? Clarity in her eyes flickered like a guttering candle. Enzo, my boy. My beautiful, terrible boy. Tears spilled down weathered cheeks. I tried so hard to save him. But you can't save someone from their own blood. I was crying too, overwhelmed by the magnitude. This wasn't the partial recognition we'd achieved through bridging. This was something else. This was Silvana, fully present, fully aware, breaking through the fog of her disease, with a force of will that shouldn't be possible. He loves you, I told her. He loves you so much it's destroying him to lose you. I know. She touched my face with trembling fingers. That's why I held on. All these months of darkness, confusion, fear, I held on because I could feel him. Waiting. Hoping. She took a shuddering breath. But I'm tired, Maria, so tired. Elena, I said softly. My name is Elena. She smiled again, that knowing ancient smile. I know who you are, child. I've always known. From the first moment you walked into my room, I could feel it. The same heart. The same fire. Maria would have loved you. The door burst open. Luca filled the doorway, face taut with urgency. We need to go now. I stood, hand still clasped in Silvana's. What's happening? Situation escalated. Boss is on his way back, but there's been a breach. They know you're here. Fear flooded through me, cold and electric. But underneath was something else. Determination. I'd promised. Enzo, I'd stay safe. I'd promised myself I'd protect what we built. I looked down at Silvana, at this woman who'd clawed back to clarity to warn me, to give me this moment. I have to go, I said, but I'll come back, I promise. She squeezed my hand one final time. Protect my son. He thinks he's the strong one, but he's not. He breaks just like everyone else. Be the one who holds him together. I will. Luca pulled me toward the door, but Silvana's voice stopped us both. Luca, he turned, and I saw something I never expected on his brutal face. Tenderness. Respect. Yes, Signora. Bring her back to my boy, whatever it takes. He nodded once, a promise sealed in silence. Then we were moving through corridors that had become enemy territory, toward an exit that might or might not be safe. My mind raced, fear and hope and love tangled into something I couldn't name. Somewhere Enzo was fighting to get back to me. Somewhere behind, Silvana was fighting to hold on to clarity that cost her everything, and I was caught between them. The bridge connecting son to mother, man to humanity. The car waited outside, engine running. Luca pushed me into the back seat, covering me with his body as we peeled away. I heard shouts behind us, the screech of tires, but I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Only forward, toward whatever came next. Toward Enzo. Toward home. My phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "I'm coming for you. Hold on, E." I clutched the phone to my chest, Silvana's words echoing in my mind. Protect my son. Be the one who holds him together. I would, whatever it took, however this ended. We were in this together now, and together we would survive. The morning light fell across Silvana's room the way it always had, warm and golden, touching the photographs that covered every surface. But today there was something new. A picture of the three of us, Silvana, Enzo, and me, taken last week during one of her increasingly frequent lucid periods. In it, she's holding both our hands, her smile radiant, her eyes clear. She knew us that day, not as Maria and her friend, but as Elena and Enzo, as her son and the woman who loved him. It only lasted an hour before the fog returned, but we had that hour. We had that photograph. We have more good days now than bad. The breakthrough we achieved isn't a cure. There is no cure, but it's something. It's a connection. It's peace. It's the gift of seeing recognition in her eyes, even if only in flashes, even if only sometimes. The threats Enzo dealt with that night are gone now. He won't tell me the details, and I don't ask. All I know is that he came back to me, as he promised. That Luca got me to safety, as he promised. That we survived together, as we promised. I've returned to research, but not at a university. Here, at this facility named after Silvana, I'm documenting everything. The protocols we developed, the breakthroughs we achieved, and the evidence that emotional memory persists even when everything else is lost. It will help thousands of families. It already has. Enzo is here every morning now, just like me. We do the bridging together. And Silvana accepts him not with fear, but with gentle affection. She calls him the boy with sad eyes, more often than she calls him Enzo. But she's not afraid. She holds his hand. She listens to his voice. She smiles at him. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she calls him her son. I'm writing a paper about our findings. Emotional memory persistence in advanced Alzheimer's. Disease, a case study and pattern. Recognition and therapeutic bridging. My former colleagues are already calling it groundbreaking. Funding organizations are reaching out. Universities want to replicate our protocols. But those things don't matter as much as they once did. What matters is the way Silvana's face lights up when I walk into her room. What matters is the way Enzo can sit with his mother without her screaming. What matters is that we found a way to reach someone everyone said was unreachable. What matters is love in all its complicated, painful, beautiful forms. Today I enter her room to find her already awake, looking out the window at the gardens below. She turns when she hears me, and her face transforms with joy. "Maria," she says, and I no longer correct her. I've learned that Maria is who she needs me to be. That being Maria gives her peace. That love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. "I'm here," I say, taking her hand. "I knew you would come." She smiles at me, then looks past my shoulder. "And you brought the boy with sad eyes." Enzo steps into the room and Silvana doesn't flinch. She holds out her other hand to him, and when he takes it, she sighs with contentment. "His eyes are less sad today," she observes. "Yes," I agree, looking at the man I love. "They are." We sit there together, the three of us, connected by invisible threads of memory and emotion and stubborn, relentless hope. Outside, the world continues its complicated dance of violence and beauty, loss and redemption. But here, in this room, we've carved out something precious. We've found a way back to each other, and that, I've learned, is everything. Silvana falls asleep with both our hands in hers, her face peaceful, her breathing steady. Enzo and I sit in silence, watching her rest, grateful for every moment, every lucid period, every small victory. "Thank you," he says quietly, "for not giving up, for seeing what no one else could see, for loving us both enough to fight. Always," I tell him. And I mean it. Because some bridges are worth building. No matter how impossible they seem, some loves are worth fighting for, no matter how complicated they are. Some people are worth saving, even when they think they're beyond salvation. And some connections, like the one between a mother and her son, between the living and the dead, between who we were and who we become, are stronger than any disease, any threat, any force that tries to break them. Silvana taught me that. Enzo taught me that. And every morning, when I walk into this room and see that flash of recognition in a dying woman's eyes, I'm reminded of why I became a scientist in the first place. Not to publish papers or win grants or prove theories, but to build bridges, to create a connection, to help love find its way home. Even when home is a memory, even when love is complicated, even when the bridge crosses an impossible distance, we find a way. We always find a way.